Welcome to Your Brand Amplified, the podcast where we interview marketers, publicists, and brands to learn their stories, what makes them tick, and tips and tricks that make a difference. This is a long-awaited interview and much anticipated on my side. My listeners and viewers don't know because they haven't been through the journey that we've been on. Raman Seghal, thank you so much. I'm so glad to finally meet you and see you.
Yeah, likewise. I feel like we've been trying to do this for about 18 months now. So I hugely appreciate your patience and apologies, but I'm here now and I'm really excited for having a conversation with you today.
Yeah, well, and thank you. And I know we both had to change the schedule every once in a while. And some of it's because, as we were talking before the show, you have lived in a few different places. Travel is part of your love. And you and your wife had your family traveling and been really focused on having a global community be part of your day-to-day in your life and in your business. You grew up in the UK.
That's right. I grew up in the UK, in Newcastle, which is in the northeast of England. So it's actually very close to Scotland. Whenever I'm anywhere in the world, they just assume it's London, but it's the other end of the country to London. Yeah, very kind of normal upbringing in the nicest possible way. I was the youngest of three. I am the youngest of three brothers. Got exposed to business quite early because my parents ran a post office. And I was trying to remember, but I think I was 7 years old when I was working in the post office. And so,
nice.
First generation parents work you hard. There's no lions. And so, selling candy and chips and whatever else we used to sell in the shop years before we had phone with calculators on or anything like that. So some good early lessons in terms of customer service, getting rid of stock and things like that. I went to university college in the UK and then continued my journey. But as you mentioned before, I spent a year traveling around the world when I was about 20 or 21. And that really set me down a path of almost falling in love with travel. And then my business journey has then become a very global one. My business is a global one. My family and I, we move around. We need to stop now, right? My wife's like, you need to stop. But yeah, that international business pieces, I love it. I probably have about 7 or 8 calls today, and they would have been from people all over the world. And I do love that aspect of what we do.
Amazing. Well, so you have been running your own company, Raw Marketing.
Yeah, well done. Perfect. First time. Yeah.
For quite a while. And you also are an author. You have a podcast. You have another couple of businesses. You have been a member of the Forbes Council. How did you get your start? Because you specialize in bio and pharma marketing, correct? And that's something that I'm really excited to dive into. I actually have some students, because I teach at university, and some grad students who are really interested in getting into marketing and communications in this industry. So I'm like, I'm going to have to connect you to them afterwards.
That's fine. That we're always
a little more international flavor. But yeah, so what attracted you to those industries and also to the field of marketing?
So I suppose the field of marketing came first. I always remember this. I was doing business studies in school, grade school rather than college. We did the finance module and then we did the people module. And I always remember there was a session on brand. And the teacher, these guys are not marketing experts, and he put up the logo of McDonald's. And I remember asking him a million questions about brand and what it meant. And to the point where he was just dude, I don't know that much information, go study it yourself. And I remember it was the first thing at school where I was I'm so interested in this. I'm so fascinated by, what makes a brand. And, when you look at different brands, what you feel and why other people feel different. And actually that led me down a path to do marketing at university. I remember telling my mum and she was just what, traditional Indian family, everyone's a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant,
it's marketing.
What the heck is marketing, right? So, and then ended up going down that path. And the pharma and biotech thing's quite interesting because it was completely unintentional. The first job I had after I graduated when traveling, came back to the UK, I kind of fell into this agency role, and my first client was a contract manufacturer of drug products. And actually, they're a great example of who our clients are today. Effectively, they made the products that were being used as part of clinical trials.
Oh, wow.
So they were really high-end, quality manufacturing, safety is paramount and quality is paramount, et cetera, et cetera. But what I was fascinated by was how old school the industry was in terms of the manner in which brands looked and how they marketed themselves. This was 20 years ago, right? So I was starting to experiment with digital marketing. The agency I worked with actually originally was very strong in comms and PR. So I really fell in love with PR around that time as well, in comms, and I almost just found myself in this niche. And that then led down a path of, ultimately I ended up working for that company in-house as their head of marketing. And I was very fortunate because the CEO there was incredibly supportive of, she used to say like, you need to go do this. Like, you have something here. And that ultimately was the starting point of remarketing in 2009. And then, for a few years, we did all kinds of, when you start a business, like, you take any work you could get. So we couldn't specialize on day one. And so, I remember we launched a TV channel, and there was a time we worked with all the bars and clubs in the city I lived, which is great when you're like, late 20s and all the team are relatively young, and you kind of like, you can get into any club and bar and drinks are free and all that kind of stuff. That was fun. But it got to like 2015, 16, and I had a bit of a juncture in a crossroads, and it's actually documented in the book in quite a lot of detail. And what I found is quite a lot of founders and entrepreneurs do it, where they stumble across a business, they're accidental business owners. And then at some point in their journey, it's kind of like, well, like, what am I actually trying to do here? What are we trying to be? You've almost cracked the nut in terms of like having clients and retaining clients and having business. And we always had this solid core of clients in life sciences. Just to be really clear for your listeners as well. So for us, our clients in the area that we focus in on the drug products that you're getting off the shelf at CVS or whatever is actually the supply chain of that entire industry. So in order to develop a drug, like a compound has to be discovered, it has to be developed, it has to be safely formulated and manufactured and packaged. And that takes 10 years typically to do. And in that ecosystem are thousands of companies all over the world that support drug development companies. It's a great example for you and your listeners, probably like the COVID vaccine. So everyone knows like the big companies behind the COVID vaccine,
right?
But if you look at those vaccines, they're probably manufactured by one of our clients. They're probably packaged by one of our clients. They're probably tested by a client. They're probably distributed. So behind the package in the drug is an entire ecosystem. It's very similar to the automotive telephone industry. You have your iPhone and it's got Apple on it, right? Now, Apple doesn't make everything in there. They have this huge suppliers that do everything. That's actually the space we play in. We're a very niche agency in that space. But in 2015, 16, we decided to focus the business on that sector. That really supercharged the growth of the business. And I'm happy to kind of talk about that a bit more if it's helpful and to your listener.
Absolutely. And I want to flag here because most people, you're right. And I know that it's different. The way the end product is what we're used to seeing, and the way it's marketed is different depending on what country you're in. In the United States, you have TV, commercials, you have magazine ads. And I know in the UK, it's a little different. You can't have the same kind of advertising for the end product. But I don't think we even think about how are you marketing? How are people, those end product organizations, how are they finding out about the companies in the supply chain and how are they being marketed to them? So that's something completely different, probably, and something that we don't really think about. Like you said, it applies to every industry. There are people who are fighting every aspect of the final product that the end company sells, right? But how do you get from there to there?
It's a really good point. And actually, we are a pure play B2B agency. Like, we are fully business to business, very technical, very scientific. So it's a pretty high barrier to entry. There's only a handful of agencies like us in the world. They come and go quite quickly because when people come into the sector, they see how high the salaries are. Like, oh, actually, I'm going to do that. I'm going to go into a different sector instead. But because we've been doing it for 14 years, I think we've built a really good kind of reputation. And back to the kind of previous point, when we specialized, and I think, for any of your listeners that run any kind of business, particularly service businesses, we found that when we niched down in a sector, that was one of the key decisions in terms of really, really supercharging the growth of the company and also internationalizing the business, because our client base is global. And I always remember the first international client was a Danish company, and they make like medicated chewing gums, think of like nicotine and if you're trying to give up smoking and you have. So they're a company that specializes in making those types of products. They sit within the pharmaceutical manufacturer. And I remember we pitched for this project. The cost we thought was astronomical at the time. It was like $20,000 or something like that. It was nothing in the grand scheme of things. And we won this project and we got to go to Denmark and run a workshop. And like, I remember being on the flight being, oh my God, this is like the life. I get to travel with work. I'm getting paid for it. And like, I remember ringing a friend of mine being like, we've sold a brand workshop. Like, I don't even know what a brand workshop is. Can you tell, you kind of like, you make it up as you go along. And when we went for dinner so we went there, had a great session. And I remember having dinner with a client. The client said to me, he said, I want to give you some feedback. And I was thinking, oh my God, he's going to like tell us we're terrible or whatever. And he said, you nearly didn't win the work. And I was like, oh, like, did someone say something like inappropriate or did we just miss the mark? And he went, no, you guys are too cheap. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what do you mean too cheap? And it was a real penny dropping moment because effectively what we built our business around like marketing to businesses in the northeast of England, right? Like that's where we have clients actually across the UK by this point, but we were like a generalist UK agency, right? And actually what they looked at us, because what we were coming was like a global specialist agency in our sector. And actually, I remember the other quotes that they had were like 3 times more than ours. So on one hand, like I wanted to whack my head against the wall because missed opportunity, but it really was a great lesson in terms of like, if you can find a really strong niche and own that space, and if there are clients that want a problem to be solved, then it does give you a much better positioning to have a premium price and have a more protected business. And that really was the catalyst for international growth. So once that happened, we firmly set our eyes across Europe. And then I remember also then how our business grew in the US because our friends in the US love to spend money on marketing, right? And across, culturally, it's very different to Europe, right? In that sense. And this, like, having spent a lot of my life in North America now, like, marketing is such a part of the fabric of society of North America, like particularly in the US. It is, to your point there about commercials, it's so ingrained in the way that people operate and actually the way that businesses work. Of course, we're going to be marketing, right? Like everyone, it's an investment. Whereas parts of Europe and clients we've had in Europe that are kind of seen as a line item of cost, right? And like, oh, do we need to spend that money? Whereas obviously here in North America, it's very different.
Well, I think it's also that differentiator of a lot of people expect to create a product or service and they think people are just going to find them because they put up a website, start posting on social media. But you have to have that integration of all of your touch points, and marketing is a big part of that. So I love that you lead from brand because that's so important. If you need to know who you are, what your positioning is, who your ideal customers and clients are, completely. So that you can get to the right messages for the right people in the right spaces. And there are many companies in the United States or in North America that also think that they can just put something up and they're not necessarily going on that journey and creating a brand and creating, their marketing position. And
they're just wasting dollars. They're just wasting money, right? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And they're just sitting there and it's like, no, you have to put it into everything. So
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I remember when we went through that process and then we rebranded, we didn't really change the name of the company, but we changed all the visual identity to be very, very focused on industrial and pharmaceutical sector. And there's a client that we still work with, this in 2016. She sent an email and I remember speaking to her and she said to me, I cannot believe a business like yours exists for a company like mine. It was like she'd uncovered a gem. Yeah. And like to your point before around like knowing your audience really, really well and knowing what they're looking for and what problems you solve. Mm-hmm. And that actually when they discover you, like it's not like you're selling them something. It's like they are finding you and they're like, oh my, I remember she was like, oh my God, I can't believe, I'm in Barcelona next week for a big conference and like, I'm going to see her and it's going to be 7-8 years since we worked together. Like, and it was that first one where I was like, again, another running a business that there are these weird peddly dropping moments along the journey. Like, oh my God, like that's it. Like, why didn't I think that? So yeah, a great learning. So, I'm happy to share with your listeners as well of that, to your point, just really, it's very basic when we say like, know your target audience. But I think because we work with so many marketing people, I'm always quite shocked by how many marketing people don't speak to their clients. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, how, like all the good stuff we do in our business always comes from like client insight. Yes. And like regular client, just speaking to them and understand their pains and problems. And so many growth opportunities come from just having that dialogue with your customers. And a lot of marketing people like will happily hide behind like, well, I just do social or website or SEO or whatever their tactics are. And I'm like, get out and speak to your customers. Like, it'll change. You'll hear the language there. You'll hear their pains. Your copy will land so much better if you can actually make them feel like that.
Yeah. And then I also love the point that you made about undervaluing your services. Like, to you, that was a big win. But to the other company, they're like, no, you almost didn't get this job because you didn't value your own work.
Yeah.
And I think that's another thing that a lot of people in their entrepreneurship journey forget to do. We think like, oh, we have to start with this pricing because this is good enough for us, but it's also going to keep us competitive. But then that doesn't really work ever. I haven't seen it work, because then you get the wrong people coming in who aren't going to spend as much money. And then that's a whole other story.
No, you're right.
So what does it look like when somebody comes to work with you, and how is marketing them to these other companies different than what consumer might think of as marketing when you're in the B2 consumer world?
Yeah, in some respects, there's huge similarities, right? It's still, you are trying to map out and understand a buyer's journey. Just the nature of that journey is slightly different, and that's the thing. So companies often come to us where phase of transformation or consolidation, or like they've been bought by a private equity company, or they've gone public, or they've grown really quickly. In fact, I'll give you a real example. There's a call I had this morning. This company has grown really, really quickly in the US. It's been bought by a private equity company, and like the capabilities they have are like cutting edge, brilliant capabilities. Actually, they work with some of the biggest pharmaceutical brands in the world. And yet their website and their branding and everything looks like it's from the 80s. And that's a very typical thing. And it's like, they're not getting any traction from a lead generation perspective. They're not getting any inbound coming in. So the journey then we take them on is quite a strategic journey initially, which is like back to the point of what we said there, like, where are we trying to get to? Who are we targeting? What's, whether that be geography or new segments in the market, what products are we, not products, but what capabilities can we offer the market? And what I suppose huge advantage of, we work in this market day in, day out, we can overlay the market trends, which is actually, we're seeing huge growth in this area. And so maybe it's worth you guys looking at, talking about X capability or Y capability, because we know there's a huge demand in it in the market. So, and my first ever job was at Heinz on the Heinz tomato ketchup brand. So I have like this consumer background where actually the stepping stones to getting to a marketing strategy are very similar. It's just slightly different approach. And, versus say a consumer where you're saying, hey, we're going to target a 15-year-old girl who's a geek, right? Back to the conversation we had before, versus actually we want to target, biotech companies in Boston at this scale. And this is what the typical decision-making unit looks like. And these are the 2 or 3 people we want to target. Like, what events are they going to? Where are they looking online? And what trade publications are they looking at? And we try to build up a bit of a picture of that. And then, so you're trying to marry up, the need of the market, the need of the customer, the end market. And I suppose the other thing that's really evolved in the last few years for us is the personas our clients target aren't just clients. They're potential employees, right? Because that's been huge. So often when you're mapping stakeholders at the start, there's like potential clients, which is the obvious one, but then it is like, how do we attract new talent to our business? And actually, how do we attract potential investors to our business as well? The stakeholder mapping part of it's actually quite important early on, so you don't miss any of the key personas. And then it's all the fun stuff, right? Like the messaging, the creative, and we try to do that in a very kind of collaborative way with the client. So like their team goes on the journey, and they're often not marketing experts, right? Like they're scientists and technical people. So it's actually quite fun for them. And we say to the leaders of the organization, you take them on the journey, they're going to be much more invested in the outcome, as opposed to what often happens is, I was in Boston a couple of weeks ago and I was on a trade booth with this company, and they were like, a moan about how crap their booth was. Like, I don't even know what this means. Like, no one listens to us. And I was thinking, it's because no one's involved you in the process, and so you're going to have a much better chance of success if you actually take people on the journey. So, we take a very strategic approach, but the tactics are probably not that dissimilar. It's email marketing, it's web, it's social, it's like, all that kind of stuff. And then trying to work out, where do we use AI in all this mix? And like, that's which is hugely challenging for us, because we're dealing with a lot of confidential and scientifically technical information. So you can't just say, write me a blog on X, Y, and Z, because it'll just give you very generic crap, which is just not actually. In fact, we sent that to a client and be like, you guys don't know what you're talking about. And so So yeah, that answers your question, by the way.
Yeah, it does. And you also talked about, without saying these words necessarily, the psychographic and demographic profiles of who you're targeting. And that's something that I think is so important these days. We have to have the data analyses. We really have to know where these people are, where they're living, where they're working, what drives them, what motivates them to get to where you're going to be able to put the right messages to reach them at the right time.
Yeah, and that psychographic piece is really, really important because I think in our industry, it's actually more important to an extent than the demographic piece. It doesn't really often matter, where they're based and if they're male or female or whatever. It's normally what phase they are at and their chances of making a decision. Are they looking for something at a particular time? And we put a lot of emphasis on customer experience and like taking clients through before they even know about you and who they are. Like, what do you want to stick? Because everyone's like, oh, I want them to know this and that and this and that. And like, humans don't think like that. We're like very simple. We're like, you have like, if I name a couple of brands, you'll think one or two words, right? And that's it. Like, all the marketing they've done at you. And so, we often advise our clients, like, try to be known for something really sticky, like something that's oh, wow, like, didn't realize they did that. And actually, they probably do a load of other stuff. But just the fact that they do that might be enough to kind of pique curiosity from a potential buyer or potential investor or whatever, be like, to go dig in and be like, oh, who are these guys? All right. Like, and then it's a standard. I totally agree on the demographic, psychographic stuff. It's super interesting.
Yeah. Thank you. And I love digging into it. And I think it's something that everybody needs to think about as they're going through. And even on the PR side of things, I know I'm going to do a better job if I have this information, if I know that they really have their branding down, and I know what's going on with their other aspects of the marketing campaigns. Are you ready to take your brand to new heights? Join the Brand Amplifier for Entrepreneurs program. Learn how to build, elevate, and amplify your brand with a comprehensive 10-module course. Learn more about it and other ways to implement our strategies at fullcapacitymarketing.com. Click on EFCM Learning Hub for more information. Can't wait to help you amplify your brand. So I do want to get to your book and to your podcast. But before that, you are the founder, you're the president. What would happen to your company? The name of the company is based on you, right? And I think this is something that we get into as founders as well, is we often have those relationships and we've built up this body of work, time, foundation with these different companies we work with. What happens if you weren't there? Do you have it set up for that? If you were to say, you know what, I want to travel with my family for the next year, that the business would still run and that you would know that you can come back and it's going to be as good or better than you found it?
That's a super question. I have to say, 5 years ago, the answer would be no. When I moved to the US, we made a big decision. I mentioned like a couple of key pivot points in our niching down. There was the internationalization. And the next big one was I hired a CEO. Mm-hmm. So we have a CEO called Emma in the UK who I hired when I moved to the US because my role was very outbound, externally focused. And like, you want me with clients, like trying to solve problems, you don't want me trying to work out what finances to have or whatever. Like, I'm not the best. And for that. And so that was a really key decision in terms of the kind of history of the business, because actually what ended up happening was Emma effectively took on the running of the business day to day. So no one reports into me, which is quite interesting now. So I have no direct reports. And the other thing that's happened on that journey is we did a private equity deal in the agency last year.
Yeah.
And so like, that's an amazing thing to go through as a founder, where you take your business to the point where you can sell a chunk of your business. And like, it's an interesting one because it comes with the obvious upside, which when you sell a bit of your business, but there's another person around the table and the dynamic, or there's another company around the table, another shareholder, the dynamic changes. But when Emma came in, I didn't bring out Emma in with that end or that goal in mind. That's just happened because we've grown so quickly in the last few years. And what it meant is when we ran that process and actually we spoke to companies that were interested in buying us, investing in us, is we were much less valuable if I was doing everything. So for exactly your question. So we're much further down that road than most people are. To the point where when my third son was born, I took 2 months off work. And it was in the summer in Boston and it was absolutely fun. It was during COVID, so it wasn't the greatest time, but nevertheless, like was a fun time to spend time with our family and all that kind of stuff. So I think now it would be easier than it probably would a few years ago. And it's something I spend time with companies that I've invested in now or other founders who I help. I'm kind of saying to them, like, you need a bit of a plan for, like, do you really want to do this forever and ever? And even if you want to be in the company forever and ever, that's fine. But do you want to be the person doing absolutely everything? And so yeah, I think to answer your question, I think the company would still feel it, but I think they would feel it in a different way than it was, I'm not delivering client work every day like I was 5 years ago, but it would probably, like, my energy, it would miss my vision. I'm very out there with the business and the brand. So I'm at events and, like, I'm in Barcelona next week and I'm, like, on stage because of the podcasting. I'm on stage. Pretty cool. I'm actually interviewing the head of manufacturing from Moderna, the vaccine manufacturing, which is, like, a cool thing to do, like, even from a layperson's perspective, not in the industry. So that's my role. So the business would miss the, like, we call it the halo effect of what I do with the business. But we've got a very competent leadership team. We've got so many people that have been with me for many years who know what they're doing. They know how to look after clients. So I'm not planning to disappear anytime soon.
Yeah, but I think it's something that a lot of people don't consider when they're starting their business is you're ready to pivot, you're ready to take on something else, you're ready to retire. But what does that look like and how can your business really move forward without you? And I think it's something that all of us have to consider. I see it in nonprofit world, I see it in the for-profit world. And I love that you mentioned halo effect, because I also think when you are the head of the company, your day-to-day can't be in the minutia all the time in the operational aspect. You have to be able to get out there and everything that you do is going to come back. So if I'm teaching versus, working in my agency day job, the teaching is still going to lead to great things for the agency.
Totally agree.
Or my podcast, right? Like all the different things that we do lead back to serving a higher purpose for families, ourselves, our personal enjoyment, and for our companies and our businesses.
It's one of the hardest transitions to make, though. It's not an easy transition. And, I remember, the company I said that the first company I worked for, the pharmaceutical, the owner of that business, founder, she ended up investing in my business. And actually we're very, very close friends now. And she went through this exercise with me. It's in the book, in fact. And it's like, effectively, she put a flip chart in the room. Gerald, tell me what things you do for the company. And I was like, business development, client servicing, blah, blah, blah. And this list was like 20 things. And she was like, okay, like, do you see the problem here? And I was like, oh my God. And like, effectively we went through an exercise. She's like, well, if you could only do one of these things, like, where's the biggest impact on the business? And then actually we were able to add a couple more, but effectively those 20 things became 3 things, which is some of the stuff that you just mentioned there, actually, Anika, which is like being out there with clients, creativity, halo effect, like being the brand ambassador for this company. And actually that's the really valuable stuff, to your point, because lecturing at a local college actually will help support recruitment, right? Being at this event will support business development. Doing the podcast will support lead generation and profile and credibility and all these types of things. So I could not agree with you more. But that was a real eye-opening exercise for me, because it meant that all the things that were not in my superpowers, I had to find a home for them, and I had to delegate them or eliminate them. Yeah, that takes I have a year now, and that's amazing because it takes so much admin. But actually all it does is it just gives me more time to do the stuff that I need to do, which is much higher impact on the business.
Yeah. Fantastic. And you started your podcast at the beginning of the pandemic. And did that before you wrote your book. So what led you to start a podcast?
Yeah, actually, they're very different. They're kind of unrelated. I understand why that's terrible from a marketing perspective. But, the podcast, I remember I flew from Boston to San Francisco, and I remember getting on the plane. This is like classic British person who doesn't realize how big the US is. And I was like, in my mind, I was like, it's a 3-hour flight, right? I was like, only that thought. And I remember looking at the flight, and obviously what I didn't take into account was the 3-hour time difference. When I looked, and it was my first East to West Coast flight, and it was like, 7 hours. And on that flight, I actually wrote like the entire thing for what the podcast was going to be. Like, for travel, I'm really good at working on flights and for planes and trains.
Oh my gosh, I wish I were.
Honestly, I think my best work has been like my best ideas, and I'm just in the zone. I've got my headphones in and got a beer or whatever I'm having. And that's where the kind of podcast idea, I love podcasts. Like I'm a total podcast junkie and I have been for years. And there just wasn't anything like this in the sector. And so we didn't do it to coincide with COVID, because obviously COVID, this was the January before COVID. And it just happened that we launched around the time of COVID. Some weird luck things happen. I mean, the sector, I mean, we were talking to people about who are manufacturing drugs or trying to, I mean, the first maybe 20, 30 episodes, we're talking about how the hell are we going to find a drug product from within the industry. And so our access to guests was really good because everyone was working from home. And then, and it's just really built. And, you know, pound for pound, $1 for $1 is probably the best marketing platform that we have invested in it is time consuming, and like, you have to commit to it, because you and I sat here today, like this is an hour of your time, right? And plus the prep and the post-production, all that kind of stuff, and the publishing. And yes, you get better at all that, but it is your time. Like this is, you could be selling this time to a potential client or whatever. So I think you have to make sure it's aligned with what you're trying to achieve. And for us, what it did is it gave us access to business leaders in our sector that we would never have got access to otherwise. And so it helped build the credibility of me, of the business, of everything that we do. It really reinforced us as a player in this space. It's also like, for a relatively conservative old school sector, it was new, it was cool. It was like, oh, it's a podcast. And that's a huge benefit. And to your point before about, it leads to other opportunities, right? Like I'm doing this 3 speaking gigs at there's 30,000 people at this event next week. Now they're not on while I'm on stage, but that's very high profile in our industry. And so it's kind of a bit of a domino effect, but it's a good example. Like if you stick to something and do it really, really well and commit to it. Like we threw a party in New York around an event last year, which was all molecule to market. You know, your listeners wouldn't listen to the podcast because it's so random for them, but it's effectively interviewing leaders in the space that we work with and their kind of journey and learnings, what's happening in the market, trends, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then that feeds content, right? Like it's a never ending kind of machine for content, isn't it?
I love, actually one of the things I'm doing right now is for my job at Full Capacity Marketing, I am turning all of the episodes that I've had my CEO, I've been doing her PR, right? And so I'm turning all of those episodes into blog posts, but not recapping the episode, but really adding more research and more depth to all of the things that she talks about, that she's built up this knowledge base over a multi-decade career in our industry.
That's awesome.
So there's so many ways to use and repurpose all of the content. And you mentioned SEO. It's been amazing for SEO. And not to mention the connections that we get to make with people we wouldn't otherwise meet. Because already I'm like, I have 2 students who want to be in your industry, who are in communications. So I want them to start following you. I want them to listen to your podcast. I want them to get to know who you are and your company, and have you be perhaps somebody they can go to see if you have a partnership or to ask for advice in that industry.
Absolutely,
and that's really exciting, because there aren't a lot of people I get to talk to about that, right? When I know I have students who want to go in a specific sector.
Then it's useful. Absolutely. And you know, it's funny, even the things you talk about there, like we're experimenting with AI tools at the minute on how we take, I mean, we've transcribed them for ages, and then, but we're playing with some AI tools in terms of like, how do we make them into really, really good content? How do we then repurpose them for different platforms? And like, I get the like skepticism about like, oh my God, it's going to take all our jobs, but like, I don't buy it. What I buy is it's going to actually really improve our output. It's going to make sure we can produce better quality work at speed. And so, you know, that's a whole other conversation and topic, which is like, how do we embrace it? But, you know, I think people should be embracing it. Look at the tasks that you're doing that are taking a lot of time or that are just a bit annoying. Yeah. And I suspect there's a tool out there that actually,
Yeah. I have so many things that I need to automate better or to use different tools to streamline my processes a little bit better. But now let's pivot a little bit and talk about your book, The Floundering Founder. I love alliteration. 24 lessons to focus your business and better yourself. What was the impetus behind your book?
I wish I could tell you it was some kind of like brand story. I met a guy who was on an agency mastermind with this, and he was writing a book. and he was telling me what he's doing. He's like, I can hook you up in this publishing company. I met them and I was like, you know what? It was during COVID and we were living in this apartment in Boston, and I traveled quite a lot with work, and obviously I wasn't commuting. And I was like, I'm never going to get a better chance. I'm never going to get the time. And actually, I'd written a couple of blogs and done a few posts about people using the time wisely because it will disappear when the pandemic's over, which is exactly what happened. And so I used a company called Scribe Media, who their model was like to kind of teach you a technique around like how to get going and how to like structure and how to write, and then help you with editing and stuff like that. But you know, I wrote, given my comms background, like I can't write. I've been writing blogs and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't know what I was going to write about. I just knew because my blogs had gone down well with people, and I tried to write in a very authentic, honest, like, here's my mistakes, this is what I've learned type of way. And it seems to always land with other founders because they're like, it's no BS. And it just says it how it's not like corporate jargon crap. It's like real life stuff. And so off I went, and you know, thankfully my wife and the kids were very supportive. So 6:45 every morning for an hour, I would stand at my desk and write for an hour every day. And I did that for 6-7 months. And I wrote the book, and then obviously went through the editing process. That was incredibly painful.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, that's, you know, it's been an amazing journey. Like, you know, it's one of those things that it's always like a bit of a life goal. Like, I want to write a book. And what's been particularly satisfying is like, no one writes books to make money, number one, right? Like, you don't make money off writing books. Right at the start, they did this thing where they're like, what is your champagne moment? And the champagne moment is like, how will you know this has been a success? And I wrote that I get a message from someone who says, they've read my book and it's absolutely changed their life. And what's been amazing, honestly, in the last year and a half, I've had so many messages on LinkedIn from other people who have read my book and been like, oh my God, like, it's got me at just the right time. It very much begins with like my journey, which was like, I was lost. I'd run in my company for a few years and I didn't know what to do. And here's the stuff that got me out of that rut and actually got my life back on track, both from a business perspective, but from a personal perspective as well. And a big, you know, why it's 24 lessons is 12 are business related and 12 are personal related, because what I found spending time with founders is, you know, they end up eating too much, drinking too much, drug habits, you know, spending no time with their kids, getting divorced, and like having family problems, and like your business absolutely consumes you if you let it. And so a lot of it was some of the things that would work for me in terms of like making sure I had time for my family, exercising, learning, like basic things that like you just should keep doing, and just because you're running business. And so yeah, and so that's, you know, the book is very much, you know, aimed at founders, entrepreneurs, even CEOs that are, you know, making, especially if they're running service companies and they're feeling stuck or in a rut or at a crossroads. It's like designed to just help them. And everyone that reads it tells me it's like really easy to read. I don't know if we're all being polite, but I suspect. And I need to send you a copy because I'm not sure we sent you a copy, but I'm going to.
Oh, but I would love to.
I'm going to someone in the mail for you. That's fine. But yeah, I'd love to know, given your journey as well, I'd love to know your thoughts.
Yeah.
And then you always get a 1-star review every often, which is like you go on Amazon and like you've got so many 5-star reviews, and then some disgruntled ex-employees giving you one.
Or,
like,
you know, or somebody that you don't like. For my podcast, what I found is I get a lot of people who are like, hey, we want to market your thing. We want to do your YouTube, or we want to do your blah, blah, blah. And if you don't respond to them enough, or if you are
give
like,
you a 1-star.
They guess. And so I'm like, are they like saying, we're promoting your podcast? I'm like, no, you're not promoting my podcast. I don't even know who you are. And you're giving me 1 star because you're trying to say that, you know,
blackmail. It's like blackmail, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. Because I'm like, I know the work that I put into this. It's the same work I'm putting into everything else I'm doing that I know is intentional, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, there are so many tangents we could go on. I think we've given us a lot of actionable information and advice that people can use no matter what industry they're in, where they are in their journey. So I really appreciate that. I'd love to hear, with the traveling, how hard has it been to move from place to place with your family? Has the transition been difficult? Is it the culture, you know, different in all of the different areas? Or have you found it's been a little bit easier because you had your business, so you had something to kind of coalesce around?
That's a great question. It gets easier is what I would say. And as the kids get a bit older, they're more used to it. So moving to the US was harder because the kids were younger and the transition was more. It was the first transition we'd made as a family. It was a dramatic one, right? Like at the time, going from the UK, the US is so different to the UK, like in so many respects. It's people think they're the same because they speak kind of similar, but honestly, they are so different and so great in different ways as well. And then we moved back to the UK, and then prior to that, I'd moved around quite a lot with my wife as well. And then we've just moved to Toronto a couple of months ago, and I mean, Toronto feels like an American city in some respects. Like it feels like in Chicago or New York or wherever. It's incredibly cosmopolitan and diverse, and a really kind of happening place. I think it'll become a real powerhouse in the next few years. But we've opened an office here because of the talent. Access to talent is really strong here. Colleges are really, really good and very diverse because it's an immigration friendly. So that's part of our desire as a business, to have more diverse thinking in the business. And we think that's going to lead to better outcomes for clients and the business ultimately. So, and then as a family, I have to say so far so good. The eldest two kids have transitioned in school very quickly. And, the thesis would be if we moved our kids around a bit, they'd become more resilient first and foremost, and they would become more adaptable to change. And that was one of the reasons that my wife and I wanted to move a little bit, because, and it's not saying that, being in the same place forever and ever is not a bad thing, like far from it. When we get settled, we love it, and you get into this like happy pattern and all that kind of stuff. But it's so good for the soul to relocate. It feels like you start again. Like if you're like me, like I love a blank piece of paper, right? Which is like, okay, like when we finish today, like I'm going home, we're getting burgers from a new place that we've never had burger from. And everyone's excited for that, right? And you find new bars and coffee shops and travel and all that kind of stuff. So it's not for the faint-hearted, but it's not impossible. Like I think where that ultimately came from was, I remember I spoke to many people over the years that always regret not moving. So I remember when we moved to Boston, and it came off the back. So I said, I know I'll regret this opportunity if I don't take it. And thankfully, my wife was very supportive, and she's like a doctor. It's not like she doesn't have a job or anything. Like she's an anesthesiologist. And so it was kind of like, it meant her putting her career on hold for us to kind of go on this adventure at the time. But we massively benefited as a family. Like we've grown, your understanding of different cultures, of different people, of everything just expands when you just broaden your horizons. And I mean, you're in the US, you probably feel this more than most people in terms of like the challenges. We even saw it living in Boston. And I think for us, we want to have a family that can adapt to different environments. And actually it's taught, and the kids go to international school, the kids from all over the world there, there's accents from all the world. And for me, I think that can only be a good thing ultimately for my children.
Yeah. Thank you for answering that. I think it's important for us to think about how we move through the world and how it affects our families, right? And I love that your book is set up also as half work and half life, like everything we do outside of work, because sometimes it is easy to forget and get in those ruts. But at the end of the day, you have your family, and that's going to be most important. Well, again, there's so much more I could ask you, but I'm going to stop it here. So, Raman, what is the easiest way for people to find you?
Easiest way is at ramanseghal.com. So if you Google my name or just, type it in, you'll find, and from memory, I'll need to check, but I think, so all my latest blogs and stuff are on there. And I think the first 30 or 40 pages are free on the website as well. So if people like what they're reading, they can go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever and buy the book. And hopefully you can see by the reviews, people seem to like it. It's a very easy read in the sense that it's lots of short chapters. And that's because I like reading like a little bit every day. And so the books I navigate to are like, if I can read, I can learn something in 10 pages every day, then great, like I've got that. And so that's stylistically. So yeah. And obviously if anyone wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, that's where I'm most active. I've kind of, ironically, given what we do for a living, I've really like come off Facebook and Insta and TikTok and everything else, just because at the point of our family, like your time is everything. And like, it's a really easy trap to find yourself scrolling on your phone for 4 hours a day, and you'd be like, oh, like, where's that time gone? And so, yeah, I read a really good book a couple of years ago, certainly recommend it, called The Digital Minimalist by Cal Newport, and honestly, absolutely changed my outlook on how I think about social media usage. my wife's laughing because she's like, all you've done is put all that time into LinkedIn. So you basically moved the time. But I'm like, at least it's valuable. At least it's valuable. Yeah. Yeah. But thank you to you as well. You know, you do some great, and your podcast obviously very successful. And I feel very honored to be a guest on your show. So thank you for being patient with us as well.
It's an honor to have you here. And I also wanted to ask, do you have any last words of wisdom, a family motto, a favorite quote, a verse, a poem, any words that you live by?
The phrase I live by is be better than yesterday. And that is the phrase that is on every slide deck in our business as well. It's like such a simple thing, and it's just around small iterations and improvements every single day. Like have like this kind of classic compound effect theory. Like if you read 10 pages a day, it will change your life. Not just like a frap, right? If you read like 10 useful pages, if you read a blog every day, if you listen to a podcast every day, you walk for 10 extra minutes, if you exercise a bit every day, they'll absolutely change your life. That's my kind of baseline motto.
Fantastic. Thank you again for being here. And
Thank you.
That I got a lot out of this. I know all of my viewers and listeners will as well. We'll put your links in the show notes so that people can find your website and know how to link in with you via LinkedIn, your book, or your podcast as well. And
thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you to the audience for coming back for another episode. I'll be back in a few days with another amazing expert. Want more? Check out amplifywithannika.com or follow me on socials at amplifywithannika.